welcome back to another book review. I'm as always your grateful host, Cam Williamson, and today we are taking on Up From Slavery by Booker T. Washington. Now, this will be probably one of the most unconventional book reviews that I do. Why? There's no way I can spoil this. This is a real person. He really existed in life. Booker T. Washington, born 1856, died in 1915, was an American educator, public speaker, and advisor to several presidents of the United States. The only quote on the back, those who are happiest are those who do the most for others. So right there breaks our normal formality of reading the back of the book to give you a general outline. If you don't know who Booker T. Washington is, he's a monumental figure in America's history. He was not only a slave, he was born into slavery. He saw the other side of slavery. He was one of the first African-American men to speak at a very important member of national importance, along with a white person. Immediately, he was 9 years old when slavery was abolished. So as soon as he was freed, he sought an education. Most of this book is about his education and how he obtained that and what he did with it. That we will get into a little bit later. I want to start by giving you guys some notable points that I think are very important, talking about the amazing character of Booker T. Washington. I think that's important. And I think it's worth noting how awesome this is as a whole. Let's start here. When you first pick this book up, it's kind of unconventional, okay? So when you open it, the words literally scan almost the entire page on both sides. So it's not an easy read. It's intimidating. The paragraphs are very long. The text is a little big. I'll read this little paragraph out of here so you guys can see a little bit of the way that the book is written and why it's a little harder to get through if you're not ready to settle in and really take what this book is offering. From the time that I can remember having any thoughts about anything, I recall that I had an intense longing to learn to read. I determined when quite a small child that if I accomplished nothing else in life, I would in some way get enough education to enable me to read common books and newspaper. Soon after we got settled in some manner in our new cabin in West Virginia, I induced my mother to get a hold of a book for me. How or where she got it, I do not know, but in some way she procured an old copy of Webster's Blueback spelling book, which contained the alphabet, followed by such meaningless words as ab, ba, ka, da. I began at once to devour this book, and I think that it was the first one I ever had in my hands. I had learned from somebody that the way to begin to read was to learn the alphabet, so I tried in all the ways I could think of to learn it, all of course without a teacher, for I could find no one to teach me. At that time there was not a single member of my race anywhere near us who could read, and I was too timid to approach any of the white people. In some way, within a few weeks, I mastered the greater portion of the alphabet. In all my efforts to learn to read, my mother shared fully my ambition and sympathized with me and aided me in every way that she could. Though she was totally ignorant so far as mere book knowledge was concerned, she had high ambitions for her children and a large fund of good, hard common sense, which seemed to enable her to meet and master every situation. If I have done anything in life worth attention, I feel sure that I inherited the disposition from my mother. So you can see, just in that one snippet of the book, the drive that Booker T. Washington had. He honors it to his mother, who was enslaved her whole life, and by the time she was freed, her health was not good. She was a little too old to go out and be as ambitious as Booker was. And let's get right into it. He went to a all-black institute, and let's start with this. I was extremely surprised Booker T. Washington's grace upon the white race in this book. From the beginning, when he's still talking about his perspective as a slave, he is talking about how white people are not inherently evil for doing this, that there are white slaves on the plantation with him, And oftentimes they were sold into slavery because they were just poor as dirt and they literally had no other way to go. They were orphans, they were whatever. And he talks about it. And I'll get into one of the passages here in a minute because there's some longer passages that I'm going to read from the book that I just think really stand out. But, the bottom line of it, and I'll just read this part to get it, it fits what I'm talking about. I pity from the bottom of my heart any individual who is so unfortunate as to get into the habit of holding race prejudice. In a time when a man was a slave, 1856 plus 9 years, he was a slave, and he is able to write something as graceful as I pity from the bottom of my heart any individual who is so unfortunate as to get into the habit of holding race prejudice. Now, Booker T. Washington has been condemned by his own race for not doing more for civil rights. I don't think that's fair. I think what he did was astonishing. He not only, at a very young age, walked for like 2 weeks to attend the only black educational system that there was in the entire country, and he did so not out of a heart of selfishness and greed, as I'm going to go learn all this and make all this money and do all these things. It was a simple ambition of I'm going to be the best version of myself I can be, no matter what life has stacked up against me. Now, he does talk about how on his plantation and during the days of his slavery, that the white people were not necessarily evil to him. Their conditions were not good. They lived in a terrible cabin that didn't have a floor, and like their food was awful. And again, like the conditions were not great. But he talks about how he didn't have a disdain for the masters of the home, but more, if you were there long enough and you were of good help and stuff, you became a trusted member of the family. So much to so when the Emancipation Proclamation came through, which in Booker T. Washington holds Abraham Lincoln in the highest of regards, he says that throughout the book. When it finally came, he said slavery being abolished actually did such a number on a lot of those farms that the farm owners, being the masters of the slaves, ended up in such financial turmoil that it ended up being that the once people who were slaves would end up caretaking for their once masters because of the genuine respect and, love that they had for one another. Again, I think this is why I wanted to read this book. Now, I'm understanding this is one perspective from one person who was in slavery for 9 years. This is not the totality of slavery and its experience. I'm giving that. But I think it's important to know that there was not always hate, division, black versus white, even in slavery, even in post, just immediately following. He talks about a lot of white people that were there to help him and that were there to advise him. And again, a lot of the presidents at the time that he was erecting his own college called Tuskegee, Tuskegee. I don't know how you would pronounce that. It was his school. One of the things that I found very interesting, and we'll get more into him building the school in a minute because it's extremely impressive what he did. When he was about done with his schooling at Hampton Institute, he then thought of erecting his own school, making his own institute, doing it the right way, where in his school he thought that, if they can't pay for their education, they can work for it. He taught his students brick making abilities and a lot of general labor type stuff to get them through until they reached a point where they were educated enough to use their minds instead of their bodies. That was kind of always the goal. He always talked about his value for night school because he had to work hard labor during the day in coal mines and stuff like that. And he was so dedicated to getting an education that he would show up, even if he was late or, barely made the class, he would show up to these night classes to get as much education as he could. When he was thinking of erecting this school, I noticed the critique of ministers. He talked about, in specific, there was people who were not able to or just did not educate themselves, usually, would on Sundays in church be hit with the call when they would fall on the ground, mutter, stutter, and then leap to the ground saying they felt the call to ministry. Well, then in ministry, they would deceive people and they would, cheat people out of money and do all kinds of terrible things that we still see go on to this day. And I liked his observation of that, to go, most ministers are doing wrong things. They're not very educated, and they're only clinging on to this because they know that they can swindle other people and they can get themselves out of manual labor by twisting words and saying things that they don't necessarily know about, or just outright lying to people about God and giving them false hope. He was like, I don't want any part of that. And multiple times he was asked to, give a sermon or do whatever. And he was like, well, I'm not a preacher, so I don't do that. I'm a public speaker. I speak. Now, I believe in God, and I have my own relationship there. He's like, but I'm not a preacher, and I don't want to be caught up in anything that they get themselves caught up in. I thought that was interesting. I thought that was extremely interesting. I want to go ahead and read this passage. Now, whenever I hear anyone advocating measures that aren't meant to curtail, or that are meant to curtail the development of another, I pity the individual who would do this. I know that the one who makes this mistake does so because of his own lack of opportunity for the highest kind of growth. I pity him because I know that he is trying to stop the progress of the world, and because I know that in time, the development of I can't even read my own handwriting. The developments as this, I can't even read it. Sorry. The developments and the ceaseless advance of humanity will make him ashamed of his weak and narrow position. So sorry, I kind of floundered that there for a second. But what he's saying is, I pity a person who limits themselves in such a way that you would spend time looking down on others or wanting poorly for others, because not only are you hindering yourself and you're hindering someone else, but you're hindering the greater cause of humanity. You don't know what you're stopping the world from being gifted from a human being, regardless of their race. If you're out on a mission to stifle someone for whatever the reason is. And it's not just about race. It is now long ago that I learned this lesson from General Armstrong, trusted advisor of his, and resolved that I would permit no man, no matter what color he might be, to narrow and degrade my soul by making me hate him. So what is Booker T. Washington saying to us there? It's not about a man's skin, his religion, his family history. You should not allow any person, in his words, to narrow and degrade my soul by making me hate him. Understand what that means from an enslaved person who had zero freedom. They were forced, and they saw nothing but their family forced into bad situations and seen as less than everyone else around you. And he somehow, naturally within him, has it. It is not long ago that I learned this lesson from General Armstrong and resolved that I would permit no man, no matter what color he might be, to narrow and degrade my soul by making me hate him. Guys, this book is so packed with inspiration, but not in a David Goggins, Jocko Willink, whatever kind of way. It's straight action. This is a very short book. It's like 17 chapters and like 100, and I think the totality of it was like 170 pages, maybe not even, 165 pages. And in it, think about this book when you pick this up, 1 foot in front of the other. 1 foot in front of the other. No matter what's in front of you, you just put 1 foot in front of the other. When he was building this institute that he created so that black people could become properly educated in a place that was suitable for them and that they deserved to be in, he started with a group of people of like 20. And they worked and they worked and they worked, hands and feet, literally building bricks to make buildings. They created an amazing institute that I think, if I'm not mistaken, by the end of it had like 400 some students going in. And a lot of the people that came to this institute were teachers from where they came from. This was like a furtherment of their education. That's how esteemed he was. And then once he, became the president of that institution and it was recognized, that's when he became sought after by, the country's leaders to be like, we need to figure out who this guy is, because they saw a black man who came from slavery and who had educated himself enough through everything that was stacked against him. This man walked weeks at a time just to get to his school. Woke up before the sun came up and stayed up way after it came up again just to make sure that he had money and an education. He was married a few times in there. He doesn't give a whole lot of detail about those. But overall, I think this is an extremely important book for our country. I will value and cherish this book, and I'm sure there will be times when I pull this book out solely to gain the perspective. That's why I wrote down a lot of these larger passages that really meant a lot to me, because then I don't have to actually go into my library and pull this out. I can just have this notebook. I highly recommend you guys keeping one, like a reading journal where you can just write down cool stuff that speaks to you from the book. If you grab this one, there will be a lot of it in that. If you've ever read this book, if you plan on reading this book, let me know. Go ahead and thumbs up the video now. Subscribe so you see everything that we put out, and hit the bell if you want to see it as soon as it goes live. I will see you guys in the next book review. Love you so much.